Hello, everybody. A warm welcome, both literally and figuratively, this evening to this, our last Black History Year event of the 2021-2022 academic year. We're really pleased that you're able to join us here this evening. I'm Dr. Kate M. Graham. I'm a senior lecturer in English literature here at the University of Westminster. I'm also the co-director of the Queer London Research Forum, and I sit on the steering committee for Black History Year. I'm hosting this event on behalf of these wonderful organisations, and it's a privilege to be able to contribute to their important work. It is also a privilege, a very exciting privilege, to be here this evening with our fantastic guest, Faridah Àbíké-Íyímídé, author of the award-winning and New York Times international best-selling YA novel Ace of Spades. Now, this is a novel which has been billed as Get Out meets Gossip Girl, and which Entertainment Weekly called the summer's hottest YA debut. Born and raised in Croydon, South London, Faridah moved to the Scottish Highlands for her undergraduate degree, where she completed a BA in English literature. She is a Morris Award 2022 finalist, the winner of the Books of My Bag 2021 Readers Award for Young Adult Fiction, and she's the winner of the 53rd NAACP Image Awards in the Outstanding Literary Work for Youth and Teens category. Faridah has also established and runs a mentorship scheme for unagented writers of colour, helping them on their journey to get published. And she's written for Enemy, The Bookseller, Reader's Digest, and Galdem. Now, during our conversation today, we're going to explore the pleasures of Black young adult fiction, the dangers of racist educational structures, and the power of Black queer representation. Faridah and I are going to chat for about 40 minutes or so, but during this time, do send over any questions or comments you have. We've got some time at the end to answer these, so please use the chat, get involved. We would love to hear what you think, and we would really love to have you involved in our conversation today. Now, before we begin, just a little reminder that this event is being recorded and will be available on our Black History Year blog site, and the link to that will be in the chat. But let's jump in. Faridah, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolute pleasure. And good having a fan, good preparation.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's too much. So I thought to start with, just like to ask you a few questions about yourself so we can get to know you a little bit, if that's okay. So when did you first realize that you wanted to be a writer?
I think I started to realize I wanted to be a writer when I realized that people actually wrote the books I was reading. Because before that point, I kind of just thought they manifested out of nowhere. And it didn't occur to me that people could actually do this, and that people wrote for a living. And it kind of was something I discovered with my mum, who was a massive reader as well, and still is. And she used to read to me before bedtime. She also used to tell me stories or recite folklore from Nigerian mythology. And as she was making up these stories, it occurred to me that these stories were things that people were probably also telling. And she would tell me that the folklore she learned was passed down in her family to her. And it has like an origin somewhere from an original writer. And so I was just like so interested in that. And I wanted to tell my own stories and kind of help other people to escape into a different world. And so that's kind of where it first started, around the time when I was like 5, 6 years old. And then when I was like 10 years old, I wrote my first story and I gave it to my year 5 teacher, Miss Hollingberry. And she was like laughing so much. It was a very serious story, I think, but she thought it was very funny. And she encouraged me to continue doing it. And I just kind of never stopped. I always found myself writing during classes. And I kind of decided I wanted to do it for like a job when I was 18, and that's when it kind of kick-started into what I do now.
And there's something so wonderful about the power of literature, whether we're writing it or reading it, to give us a space to kind of escape into, isn't there? That's a wonderful thing. Love that.
Yeah. It really is, yeah.
So you've sort of answered this already, but it sounds like you had a really sort of supportive environment in which to figure out yourself as a writer, and that was something that was possible to do and that you wanted to do.
Yeah. My mum has been so supportive. It's kind of like a saying in like Nigerian communities where we say, if you're not a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer, you're a disappointment. And so for a lot of my teenage years, I was kind of focused on wanting to see which of these careers I can force myself to enjoy. Because while it wasn't coming from my mom, like the pressure to do it, a lot of my cousins were on that path. And I come from a very working class background, and I saw my mom struggling all my life. Us kind of always having unstable housing and moving around to like from council houses, and just having really, really terrible experiences with money and the lack of stability, that I was like, you know, I want to have that stability. So I just thought to myself, being a writer doesn't seem like a career that would bring that stability. So I was like, might as well try and see if I can learn to love something else. And so that's what I kind of spent my teenage years doing. But my mum was always really supportive. She used to take me to like writing conferences when I was 16. We'd go on the train together to some conference in the middle of nowhere. And she would sit, like there was a conference we went to, I can't remember what it's called, but it was in a library. And she sat on the romance reading level of the library, and I was like in the bottom level where they were having a workshop on writing. She was just reading her Mills and Boon novels, and waiting for me to finish going to all these workshops with people giving like advice on becoming a writer and stuff. So she's always been so amazing, and kind of not a really traditional Nigerian mother. She didn't really care about anything but my happiness. So that was really lovely. But in terms of like support at school and among friends, I think that I have quite an artistic friendship group in general, but I'm quite secretive. So a lot of my friends didn't find out that I was actually writing a novel until they saw it in the news. So yeah, I just kind of kept it to myself and kind of kept it. I think a part of me was like still worried that I was like going to still have to get something more stable because of, you know, my background. So yeah, I did have a support system, but I still had those like internal worries about my finances and everything.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, shout out to your mum. That's amazing. But also, it's so important that we think about the ways in which how we kind of gatekeep who's allowed to be a writer, because we're telling young people what they can and can't do when we hold particular people from particular kinds of backgrounds up. You know, we're disenfranchising people in ways that are really, really unpleasant. So it's a really powerful thing to have you here and speaking. So when you were, so your mum's off reading Mills and Boon, and you're at these writing workshops, but when you're not actually kind of honing your craft, what sort of shows or books were you watching when you were a young budding writer?
I really, really enjoyed shows like Pretty Little Liars, and I loved House of Anubis. I really loved things that were like dark and mysterious, and kind of had every episode end on a cliffhanger. And I think that's kind of how I write now as well. I kind of like constantly want people to want to know what's happening next, because that's what I grew up loving. And in terms of books, I was so obsessed with YA growing up. I loved books like Holly Bourne stuff. She writes a lot of feminist YA. And I also really love David Levithan's work. He's like the first example of someone writing queer characters unapologetically that I saw in books ever. And so I was just kind of like, just so shocked. And I read everything he ever like published at the time. I was just like, I need to know more. I need to see more of this, because it's kind of like, you know, when you don't see yourself represented at all, when you see a glimpse of it, you just kind of get addicted. You're like, oh my gosh, I haven't been making it up in my head. It actually is something that I can be someone that I think I am. So it was really lovely seeing those examples. I was also obsessed with Patrick Ness and Mallory Blackman. And I think just while the YA I grew up with wasn't as diverse as we see now, I think it really made me fall in love with these coming of age stories that explored a lot of really deep human level stuff. And I really wanted to add to that when I was writing, and have the nuanced portrayal of sexuality and emotions and different upbringings and stuff. So yeah, I think YA is something I've always been
well, and it's been amazing watching it sort of explode as a genre, and seeing how like brilliantly it has tackled the representation of people from marginalized backgrounds. And you know, so it's really, the writers you mentioned are all kind of wonderful and doing really, really exciting stuff. So again, really sort of exciting genre to be involved in, and to see yourself represented in. So was it always going to be English literature at university then? Is that
Yes, I think I'm a person that loves a lot of subjects. My perfect degree would have been mathematics and English. but for some reason, like no one ever thinks to match those together. Because in my A levels, I took English literature and maths and chemistry and psychology. So I'm a very like kind of split person in terms of, you know, arts and sciences. But yeah, I've always loved English. I think that English has always been a subject where I felt very safe in. I love talking about books and I love analyzing deeper meanings. And there's a kind of like memes on the internet about English teachers making like a red door mean something very like profound. But I found that so much fun to like try and see the deeper meanings of what the context around the story, like what it was saying about what the writer was trying to do. And I have always just wanted to do English at university, but always kind of felt like it wasn't something that would make money or like something that would be worthwhile. And eventually I just said to myself that I'd rather, I guess, have a happy life than one where I'm constantly miserable. So I just did what I wanted to do, I think, in the end. And at university, I actually studied English with Chinese and anthropology. But my main degree was English. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed doing multiple things at once.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's so interesting thinking about the kind of random connections that sometimes come across. You come across when you're looking at different, in theory, clashing subjects. Yeah. So when you were studying English literature at university, were there particular sort of texts or readings that really inspired you when you were there?
Yeah, definitely. I think my university are now making more improvements towards diversifying the curriculum. But when I was there from 2017 to 2021. The curriculum was mostly just very white and male, and cis and het as well. And the only time in my because English, you have a compulsory module, like 2 years of compulsory modules in my university. And so during that time, we only studied, I think, James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room. Like that was the only like diverse text, and it was really annoying that that was the only diverse text. But it became one of my favorite books ever, and I think it's my favorite classic. And that really inspired kind of wanting to look at shame and kind of nuanced portrayals of sexuality. And James Baldwin became someone who I just fell in love with his work. And yeah, in my third and fourth year, I was able to specialize more, and I got to read Zora Neale Hurston, and I got to read Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I really fell in love with Their Eyes Are Watching God. And I really loved the way colorism was explored, and just Black womanhood, and the adultification of Black women and Black girls. And it really, really made me want to write something accessible for young readers and also older readers who may not have had that experience to like read about their experiences. And I wanted to do it in a way where it was also entertaining and wasn't necessarily a textbook. And so yeah, I also used like my knowledge from anthropology to talk about some social stuff. And in anthropology, we kind of discussed a lot of things. In the end, I kind of fell out of love with anthropology. I felt like it was kind of a white man's subject. Yeah, but I think generally my university experience really helped with widening not only like my knowledge, but also the things I could discuss within the scope of a novel. And I really enjoyed my degree in the end, because I think that it really, like, you know, people always warn against doing English literature. They're always like, oh, you're not gonna be employed or anything. But I think that it enriches your life in a way that can't really, like, you know, can't get from another subject in the same exact way. So yeah, I think it definitely inspired my work and
amazing.
helped with
and James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room is such a wonderful text. Yeah. And it's interesting that you kind of pull the idea of shame out of that, because it does so much fascinating work with that relationship between sexuality and shame, and just how destructive that is, not just to the individual but to like whole communities. And such, I mean, really, very powerful work. Did you get to study any YA fiction on your degree?
We actually did. In my third year, I did a children's literature course, and one of my favorite lecturers, she's like very into diversifying her course, and she had Release by Patrick Ness, and Patrick was already a favorite author of mine, so I was so happy, and I've already read it prior to the class, so I got to reread it as part of the curriculum. And we also studied another story, which was Lara Jean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, which is a YA graphic novel about kind of a sapphic relationship that's very toxic. So yeah, we got to study a few YA texts on the course, and we also got to recommend any texts we want like the teacher to add to the course. And I suggested The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta, which is a really brilliant like novel in verse about a Black gay guy from London, and they added it to the course. So I think slowly we're seeing more YA. I think YA is often looked down upon as not being literary enough to be studied, but I think that so many YA stories are so brilliant and really deserve to be studied and acknowledged as really brilliant pieces of literature.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's such a silly thing, because there is this kind of like two-tier system where YA sort of sits underneath, and you're like, some of the most powerful and political work about representation, about marginalization, about identity is coming from YA fiction, and we should absolutely be studying this. But it's also wonderful that you got the opportunity to say what you wanted to study, because also that so often not the case. And giving students agency is a wonderful thing. So I'm glad that you had that experience. And I just to say to the audience, you should be writing down every text that Faridah is mentioning here, because they're all really, really amazing. We've got a great reading list by the end. So going to shift slightly now and start asking you about Ace of Spades, this absolutely fantastic piece of work. And so firstly, congratulations, like what a fabulous novel.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm going to do a very, very short little kind of summary of it, just in case we've got audience members who haven't had a chance to read it yet. And if you haven't, what are you doing? So the novel focuses on two young Black high school students, Devon and Chiamaka, as they navigate the Niveus Private Academy, which is a very fancy private school in New York. And their lives are upended when an anonymous person starts texting gossip about them, to students across the school. And then when Devon and Chiamaka form a kind of alliance to try and solve the mystery who's behind these text messages, they come up against a deeply distressing and a deeply ingrained institutional racism that so often structures educational spaces. So no spoilers there, hopefully. So Faridah, Ace of Spades is like a wonderful mix of different influences. It's like a real page turner in terms of the narrative pace, like some real detective fiction kind of energy in there. But then it also offers us these slower moments where we get space and time to explore the characters and the ideas in real depth. But then when we start reading it, your epigrams are from Gossip Girl and Get Out, so from the kind of teen TV series and from Jordan Peele's amazing first feature. What specific influences did Gossip Girl and Get Out have on you when you were writing Ace of Spades?
I think with Gossip Girl, I was just so obsessed with the world and just the characters. I read the Gossip Girl books after I watched the show, but the show, I watched it in my first year of university, and I was just so obsessed with everything about it. And I kind of kept on thinking to myself, what would it mean to put Black characters in this space? I mean, there are Black characters on the show, the original show, but they're either reduced to kind of minions, people that kind of serve the white powerful characters, or they are white passing / lighter skinned, and kind of their race is never really brought up. They're almost treated like completely white characters and with no nuance. And so I wanted to think about what would happen if you intentionally include Black people in this world, in this space, and what happens to them, and what discussions can be had around that. And I just like to think about different ideas about that, because obviously I've got Chiamaka, who's very rich and has been in these spaces since childhood, and then Devon, who's from a working class background and has come into these spaces kind of almost unprepared for just the social aspects of it. And so I was very interested in that as like a character study, but also generally wanting to discuss and break down what institutions do to Black people that come there. And obviously that also feeds into my experience at university. And then with the Get Out comparison, I just thought the movie was so brilliant, and I loved that it was so unique. And there's actually a documentary kind of series called Horror Noir, and it goes into the history of horror as it relates to Black Americans. And there's a quote that I really love. I can't remember where it comes from, but it's the idea that Black history is Black horror. And I love how Get Out almost reclaimed horror for modern Black audiences. And so that really influences the way I wrote the tone of Ace of Spades. There's almost like a creeping feeling that something is always off. And that's how you feel in a lot of white spaces or spaces where you're the minoritized person. There's a creeping feeling that you're not safe and that something bad could happen at any moment in time. So I think with Get Out and Gossip Girl, with Gossip Girl, I definitely use like the tone of like maybe like the way that the characters speak and the voice of the anonymous person. It's kind of a snarky, you know, voice that you see in Gossip Girl, whereas the tone of the story and the way everything kind of unravels was kind of a Get Out, you know, vibe that I wanted to collect there. So I think merging those two together was so interesting for me because I think that they're almost so opposite that you wonder how they could even fit together. And I thought that was a really interesting thing for me to try and like do. And I remember thinking to myself, if I can pull this off, it could be really, really cool. Able to write it, and I'm happy it's like resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah, well, you absolutely did pull it off, that tension between the sort of the performance of teenageness and the performance of wealthy teenageness as well, which is always really specific thing. And then, as you say, the creeping horror of something's wrong and you don't know where the threat's coming from. And you can't, that lack of trust that sort of comes from that is, it's a physical experience when you're reading it, right? That you're like, where's the threat coming from now? Which again is a very powerful thing. So you sort of mentioned that there was an echo of your own university experience in the novel as well as, and so did Ace of Spades draw on your own lived experiences?
Yeah, definitely. I think so with Devon, a lot of his home life kind of mirrors my own. I have a single mother, and his like home life and the situation, some of the descriptions of the way he was living come from directly things I was thinking as a 15-year-old. And also his neighborhood kind of mirrors my own and neighborhoods I grew up in and neighborhoods from people I know. And I wanted to have a very specific feeling to the neighborhood, and that comes from my own upbringing in Croydon. But then with just generally the entire story itself, it kind of came from my experience of moving from Croydon to the very multicultural area in London, to Scotland in Aberdeen, which is extremely white, and it's a very small town. And I think I could go days without seeing another person of color sometimes. And so it was such a different experience. And it was definitely not the first time I experienced microaggressions, but I think it was the first time I was aware I was experiencing them, because I think throughout childhood, you might look back on things and think, was that person being mean for another reason? But because I was already like 18 at the time, I was, you know, now aware that what was happening was greater than, you know, just meanness. And so getting to Scotland, it was constant microaggressions. I would have people, you know, randomly pulling at my hair or staring at me, like when I'm walking around campus. And I once had a random man press himself against me in like a bookshop and just like start sniffing my hair and playing with it. And you know, I think it kind of was a traumatic experience being in Scotland, even though I love Scotland so much. I think I learned a lot about just how difficult it is to grow up there. So I met a lot of Black people who were at the university, but they didn't have my experience of coming up. They had been in this experience since, you know, they were children, and they grew up here. And it made me wonder, like, what would it be like to come of age surrounded by whiteness and constantly being made to feel like an alien thing? Because when I was growing up, I could look around me and I would constantly see my culture. I would see people that looked like me walking around my town. But I wondered what it feels like to not see that or have that at all. I had friends that went to boarding schools, so they weren't even around their families. They were around whiteness constantly and around this institution constantly. And I just thought it was so horrific. And I couldn't imagine being such a fragile 13, 14-year-old already, and then having to come of age in a space where you're told that you're just not normal. and that everything about you needs to change and you need to stimulate. So I kind of wanted to explore that in Ace of Spades. And I also wanted to unpack my experiences as well. It was almost like a really long therapy session writing Ace of Spades for me. So yeah, Scotland was definitely one of the major influences for Ace of Spades and the world of Ace of Spades as well.
Amazing. And the stress of being somewhere that you like and want to be, but then experience those, you know, acts of violence is again, it's kind of deeply distressing one. So yeah. I'm sorry that those things happened. But interesting to think about the ways in which Aberdeen becomes New York. You know, it shifts in space. So the novel focuses both on racism and homophobia. Why were those topics that you felt you wanted to explore?
So I was very into activism at around the time I was like writing Ace of Spades. I had read Malcolm X's autobiography when I was 16, 17, and I was like learning about Black history and reading articles and like really getting into the world of activism and what had been done to get us to where we are now, and what like mirrors, what like things that we have today mirrors a lot of things that have been in place for centuries and stuff like that. And so with writing Ace of Spades, I really wanted to focus on things that had been almost stripped away from stories that talk about race or stories that talk about queer experiences, because often these activists were queer Black people in a lot of spaces, in queer spaces, in Black spaces, and the intersection is often ignored. And so I really wanted to call back to the people who changed the world, like James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, and I really wanted to recenter Black queer voices in stories about resistance and justice. And so Ace of Spades was me doing that, but also as a queer Black teen, I always wanted stories that would reflect people like me in the pages, but not only in the pages, but at the center of them. You know, I wanted to be the center. I wanted to be the character that was like, you know, experiencing the things and solving the mysteries. I never was. I was always reduced to a side character or someone that died within the first couple of seconds or pages. And so I really wanted to decenter whiteness, but also decenter cis-heteronormative like narratives, and just kind of like make Black queer kids the center of my world, and all my stories will center Black queer people. So I really wanted just Ace of Spades to do what I wanted to read. And yeah, I was worried that it wouldn't sell for that reason, you know, in terms of publishing, because I think that when you talk about intersectionality, there's always a worry of being perceived as being too much, having too many intersections being discussed, or people saying, you know, there's too much going on here. But that's also just what it is to be human. I'm like, not like, you know, queer on one day and then Black on another day. I'm like a Muslim, I'm queer, I'm Black, I'm a woman. So it's like, I'm all these things at once. And I really think it's important to show that, you know, you're not just parts of a person, you're a full person at once. So yeah, that's the reason why I decided to focus on those things.
Absolutely, and it is a kind of activism to represent our intersectional selves in such a, you know, in literature, because as you say, we don't see it enough. So I think one of the things I really love about the book is that the representations of both racism and homophobia are kind of individually really complex, but then you show them as being bound up together in really important ways that we can't pull them apart because of the way, as you just pointed out, those kind of intersections. So I'm assuming the answer is yes, but was that kind of linking of those two things something that was important for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think that often people ask you to choose a side whenever you're having any type of debate or anything. And often it's people that have those intersections, like these intersecting marginalizations, who are forced to choose, or like they're kind of treated as if you can choose to be queer, you know, sometimes, or Black sometimes. So it was so important for me to show that, you know, it's something that you're experiencing at the same time. You're not just experiencing you know, racism, you're also experiencing misogynoir, and you're experiencing things that can only affect you because you are all these things at once. Chiamaka, for example, is not just experiencing racialized violence, it's also sexism a specific kind of homophobia. You know, I really wanted to explore compet with Chiamaka and the violence of heteronormative society, making a lot of women feel like attraction to men is the only valid attraction, stuff like that. So I really wanted to do so much with these characters, and just have so many conversations at once, because, you know, all these conversations are always happening at once. We're not always, you know, we're not always doing one thing at once. So yeah, that's what I wanted to do with Ace of Spades.
Brilliant. Well, and we can never reduce the characters. They're so complex and so full that's not possible for us to do it. So again, very kind of politically powerful kind of representation. And you just mentioned Chiamaka and Devon, and these protagonists, they're such vibrant, full characters. And as you say, they've both got these very kind of intersecting identities. So they're both young Black queer people from very different socioeconomic backgrounds. But what is it that you wanted to achieve with them particularly? Because they've got these similarities, but they're also quite different as well.
So I feel like I get asked a lot why I made it a dual POV narrative. And it's because I wanted to discuss the effects of systemic, you know, violence and institutional racism. And I wanted to show that this affects us in different ways, but also in similar ways. And I wanted to show that Black people aren't a monolith. And so we don't all have the same opinions of people or things. We don't all have the same fears or even same suspicions. As you will see in the story, Chiamaka might be less suspicious of people because she's had to assimilate so much that she doesn't even, you know, fear them consciously anymore. And Devon, because he's been away from them for so long, he can see things that she might not have in her own vision. So I really wanted to just show that we're not the same type of person, and also have so many discussions about different things like class. When I got to university, I assumed that everyone would be like me, because in my area where I grew up, everyone was working class. Like, there were white working class people, there were Black working class people, there were Asian working class people. And so I didn't really come across people that were not working class often. So when I got to university and I saw other Black people, I had the wrong assumption that we were both from working class backgrounds. So some came from very wealthy families, some had only been privately educated all their lives. We still experienced, you know, systemic violence. So I really wanted to unpack what it means to grow up in such like vastly different areas of privilege, but how race always affects us in the end. I even really wanted the character of Jack. He's a white boy who's from Devon's neighborhood, and he goes to school in Devon, and they both have very similar stories. They're both working class, they both have kind of single parent households, and they're both scholarship kids. I really wanted to show that Jack's whiteness doesn't protect him, like, it doesn't offer the same protections that it offers, that Devon doesn't get. So with Jack, his whiteness is always going to protect him in these institutions, whereas with Devon, his Blackness, no matter, you know, what type of privileges he might collect on the way, he's always going to be Black, and he's always going to receive those disadvantages that society, you know, presents. And so I wanted to have a lot of conversations about the intersections of race and class and the way whiteness functions, like different levels and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of what I was doing.
Amazing. Now. There's a moment where Jack gets really angry at Devon for kind of bringing them into the spotlight and putting them under the microscope. Like, it's almost Devon's fault. And it's a really interesting moment, because it does reveal that Jack's whiteness affords him a kind of the privilege of hiding in a way that it doesn't afford Devon at all. So yeah, really interesting little moment. And there's also something so interesting about the way that in which both of the characters, despite their different kind of class positions, they just, the way they get unified around not being able to trust people is really powerful. That even that kind of socioeconomic privilege isn't gonna protect you when you can't trust, and when the tension sort of emerges in the book. It's really, again, a very sort of powerful representation. So one of the things that my students say to me, and especially my kind of creative writing students, when we're thinking about between representing Black Black pain, but also representing Black joy. And when I read Ace of Spades, I find that ending such a powerful blend of resistance and hope and joy. But then during the course of the novel, both Devon and Chiamaka experience a lot of pain. Was that a tension that you were conscious of navigating when you were writing?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of conversations about the way Black pain can often be kind of packaged and really valued by, institutions, and how it's almost put on a pedestal above Black joy narratives. But I think that it's so important to have the conversations about valuing Black pain and only Black pain, but also not letting those discussions fall into the dangerous territory of then completely creating narratives that don't acknowledge Black pain, because it's so important to acknowledge that life can be painful, but it's also important to show that we are multifaceted and that life is not all pain, and that there is joy and there is hope. And I really wanted to kind of balance that in the story, because when I was growing up, I really needed someone to tell me that what I was experiencing internally was not just, the result of me not being good enough. It was a whole system at play that was constantly in the background and also in the forefront, doing this, putting out the messaging that I wasn't good enough. And so without having stories to acknowledge that, it's almost almost playing into whiteness again, because when we're constantly not acknowledging our full selves in doing that. But I think it's definitely so important to highlight stories that express Black joy, but also stories that acknowledge Black pain at the same time. I think that authors that do it so well, that I was very inspired by, people like Angie Thomas, who wrote The Hate U Give, On the Come Up, and Jason Reynolds, who wrote Long Way Down. I think they both do it so well because they just paint Black teenagers as human beings. And I think that's what I was aiming to do at the end of the day. And I think with having the ending of Ace of Spades be so hopeful, I wanted to end on a note that we aren't just our pain, we are so much more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I read an interview that you'd done where you said, and I'm quoting here, the major thing I'd want readers to take away from the book is to question all of the institutions we've been told to trust our entire lives, which is a very powerful thing. Is education one of those institutions for you?
Definitely, yeah. I think with education, we're told from the moment we get into the system that we should trust these textbooks written by people we don't know, and we should trust what we're told. And it's so strange because education, I think, has always been a very dangerous institution. Thinking back to things like Section 28, where education was manipulated. And we were taught that queerness should be hidden and persecuted. And so I think that education is man-made and systems are man-made. And so we should always question who is that person feeding us this information. And we should read around whatever we're being taught. So, if a textbook says one thing, I would then read sources from the lived experiences of the people that were around that time, or reading up about what other case studies are saying, because I think in school we're told to trust one source, we're told to trust an exam board, we're told to trust a teacher, and everybody comes with their own biases and everybody comes with their own lived experiences of the world. So I think that it can be so dangerous to just trust what we're told. We need to go out and find the information for ourselves and cross it over with our own sources and everything. So yeah, I always want people to really question everything, because that's the only way, I think, to be liberated.
Absolutely. So I'm going to shift our focus a little bit and ask you a little bit about your writing and also the kind of mentoring work that you've been involved in. So what for you has been the biggest challenge you faced while writing?
I think it's definitely the self-doubt. I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to being a marginalized person writing is just never knowing how much of yourself is too much, because you've been taught to constantly assimilate into what is normative. So it's almost unlearning that while trying to create a compelling story is very, very difficult, and can be a lifelong mission. I think every time I write a new story, there's something of myself I'm putting in that I've had to unpack and like make sure is being shown on the page in a nuanced way. So yeah, that's been a very, very difficult thing to do, and I really think that people underestimate how much work, like self-work, goes into writing when you're, you know, overcoming so much systemic violence. And I think a lot of white writers don't necessarily think they need to do the same on learning, but I think everybody needs to when we're writing and putting information on the page forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And now you've established a mentorship scheme for unagented writers of colour. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so back in 2019, like summer of 2019, I got together with some of my writer friends who all had agents and book deals. And so I was thinking about how difficult the querying process is. And querying is basically the step that you do to get a literary agent, and you need a literary agent to, you know, become traditionally published. So I was thinking about just how hellish querying is and how it's just getting harder and harder. And speaking to so many friends of mine who are POC and have spent years being just told that their story is like not the right fit, or it's too, it's just like too different from what the market wants right now. And so I wanted to find a way to help people querying and help them pitch their books in a way where they can make it compelling, and also help them with just the editing of the books, like first pages. That's what you kind of send in the submission package. So I wanted to help agented querying writers to basically overcome that first step of rejection, which is like querying, and kind of just hold their hand through the very gruesome experience that is querying. And it's been going on for about 3 years now, the Avengers of Color mentorship scheme. And yeah, it's been really great. I've been having so many mentees just have their, you know, their minds open up. As I was saying before, like it's such a big challenge to get over the fact that, you know, you feel like you're not good enough. And a lot of people come to the mentorship kind of feeling like they don't even deserve a spot in publishing. And so a lot of the work is also having them unlearn that and really kind of praising the hard work they've already done and helping them get it up to, you know, the standard and potential it can always reach with help from people that might have more like experience and industry knowledge. So yeah, I really wanted to just give back what I didn't have when I was querying.
Yeah, and also I assume there's so much work to be done around the institutional racism of publishing and of agents that also benefits from the kind of work that you're doing there.
Yeah, definitely. I actually speak to some agents about this, and they also often want to see what my mentees are working on. And so there's some agents who are definitely trying to make an active effort to try and change the ways they're looking at works. But yeah, so much work needs to be done. There's so many querying writers who are still being told that, you know, their book is too Black, too Asian, and a lot of coded language that's really racist, and it's just really terrible. And I'm hoping that there's a future soon where we just see those instances happening less and less.
Yeah, absolutely. And so was mentoring important for you on your writing journey? Did you come across people who actively mentored you either before or after you published?
I don't think I had like maybe a particular mentorship or like someone that mentored me, but I definitely had people along the way that kind of gave encouragement or like kind of looked over what I was doing and gave me notes. But generally, I felt like the writing community, who are like a lot of them are my friends now, we kind of had each other's backs at the time and just would read each other's work and be there during the querying process, but nothing like a mentor, which is why I wanted to start a mentorship scheme, so that there was someone there that had more experience that could tell you if you were on the right track or needed to rethink your strategy. So yeah, I think more so I had a community rather than a mentor.
Amazing. That's an interesting difference as well, isn't it? So our students have their graduation, our third years have their graduation tomorrow. I know that some of them are here this evening, and do you have any tips for young Black authors in terms of how they should pitch or what they should be doing?
I think for young Black authors, I definitely say to just keep writing and try your hardest to finish a full novel. I think that's one of the biggest things that people struggle with, because it's so hard to know if a story is good enough, and it's so hard to resist the temptation to just go back and continuously be editing rather than finishing a story. I think what I'd always say is finish a story so you know you can do it, and so you can edit it, because you can't edit a blank page. And I would also say that the industry, there is a lot of work to be done, but things are so much better now, and there's so many stories being published now by Black authors, and we're seeing it getting more and more each year. So I think that there should be hope in that the numbers are growing, not at the rate I would wish they would grow at, but I think that they are constantly improving, and there are so many of us that are trying to make changes internally within the industry. So I really would have people believe in themselves. I would want that, because I think it's so hard to carry that self-belief when there's so much at play and so much risks with choosing a career like writing that hasn't got many guarantees. So yeah.
For sure. So I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to take some questions from the audience. We've got some lovely questions coming in. But if you're allowed to talk about it, what is it that you're working on now?
So I'm working on so many things, but the things I can talk about is I've got my second book coming out next year. It's called Where Sleeping Girls Lie, and it's about a girl named Sade Hussein, a Black Muslim teen who attends a boarding school in England, and she has to kind of settle into school for the first time. She was always homeschooled before this point, and she might have some secrets that need to be, uncovered in the story. But generally, it's kind of like Mean Girls with murder, and I'm very excited for it to come out. It's really, really cool, and I really wanted to write a Black Muslim protagonist because, I'm Black and Muslim, and I've always wanted that representation. So I'm really excited for everybody to read it.
Amazing. Oh, well, we'll keep an eye out for that. That sounds brilliant. So, as I said, we've got some questions from the audience, and we'll start with one. I'm not sure who this is from, but thank you very much for the question. And the question is, Faridah, what does your mum think of your writing? Did she enjoy the book?
I told her not to read it. I think I wouldn't be able to write if I knew she was going to read it. Actually, I was so scared she was going to ignore my advice and just read it anyway secretly. But luckily, my mom is very scared of anything violent or gory. She's a romance reader. She only likes happy endings, and she only likes things that are very fluffy. And so I kind of played up the violence in my book. I was like, there's blood and there's guts, and there are people killing each other. And she was like, no, thank you. I'll just buy the copy and not read it. So yeah, I had to trick her.
Amazing. Yeah, there's no tension in Mills and Boon in this. So we've also got a question from Samir, who says, is asking about your kind of educational choices, and wants to know, were there any kind of wider cultural or community expectations about the educational choices that you made?
I think that definitely the norm in my family, or just generally in my community, is to try and pursue something that is more stable, because writing definitely isn't stable. But I think that generally from my own household, my mom's perspective, she kind of just wanted me to be happy and pursue whatever would make me happy. She was worried about the finances of it all. She actually, when I told her I got my book deal, she told me that I better stay in school. And she's like, please don't drop out. So yeah, with her, it was never a problem. But I think definitely in terms of community, it's not something that we often do, branching out for things that aren't stable. A lot of the time in my family, it's everybody's a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer or something like that, or an accountant. So yeah, it was definitely against what the expectations would have been for me. But I really encourage other Nigerians and other people from similar communities to pursue things that make them happy while also, you know, knowing the reality of what the publishing industry can be like, but still choosing happiness, as well as, you know, thinking about backups and stuff like that.
Amazing. And when you study something for 3 years, you've got to love it, or longer if you're medicining. Yeah, so
yes.
Sarah asks, and she's, I think, responding to your brilliant combination of kind of academic interests, your spread of A-levels. And Sarah says, that makes me think of Octavia Butler or Ursula Le Guin, and wants to know if you have any interest in writing a kind of fantasy or sci-fi piece of work.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so scared of fantasy and sci-fi, but I love fantasy and sci-fi so much. And I definitely want to write something soon. But I think I'm going to have to like psych myself up because it's just so scary. The idea of creating a whole world and like a huge series is just so daunting. But I'm such a big fan of so many fantasy authors, so it's something I want to do.
Yeah. Are there any particular fantasy authors that you really admire?
Well, this year I read Neil Shusterman for the first time, and he wrote the Scythe series, which is like a dystopian series. Now need these governments at a certain level, and it's just, there's so many conversations in it, and it's so cool and political and amazingly written, and it made me cry. I just love dystopian fiction specifically, and I love sci-fi more than fantasy, I think. But growing up, I was a big fan of Cassandra Clare and the Mortal Instruments series. So yeah, and recent authors, I love Legendborn by Tracy Dion, and I really love the Black fantasy that's coming out of YA right now.
Yeah, amazing. So we've also got a question from Simon, which we've sort of touched on, but I'm going to ask anyway. He says, "Hi Faridah, thank you for an amazing talk. Are there particular Black queer voices that you found influential on your own writing?"
Definitely James Baldwin. I think that he's just so amazing. I love Jean Atta, who wrote The Black Flamingo. I love Alice Walker. There's so many people. It's like, you know, when someone asks you what your favorite book is, you just forget everything you've ever read in your life. Yeah, there's just so many like queer authors of color that I love. I love Adiba Jaigirdar, who wrote the Henna Wars, Honey and Ichu's Guide to Fake Dating. Yeah, there's just so many. Like, I mean, that's a good thing as well. We're getting so many queer voices coming out recently. Oh, Akwaeke Emezi, one of my favorite authors of all time. I'm obsessed with their book, The Death of Vivek Oji. Yeah. It's one of my favorite books of all time. And so I also love their book, Dear Senthuran, which is a memoir, but it's a very weird memoir. It's like letters written to people in the author's life, but also telling stories from the author's journey of publishing. And it's very honest. So they talk about how much they were paid. They talk about like the nitty-gritty stuff of being a trans Black queer author. And it's just phenomenal. So yeah, really recommend Akwaeke Emezi.
Brilliant. Again, add these to your reading lists, folks. So another question, do you see a series coming from Ace of Spades? So maybe it would jump off from the foundation, the work of the foundation that Devon and Chiamaka form. There'd be a part 2 and a part 3 maybe.
Well, that's such a good question. I think I get asked that so often. And I think I really wanted to kind of tie up that world with the epilogue, but I think that there's definitely series potential. I'm not sure when that would be, but I see it. I really like would love to be in their heads again. I really love the characters, but yeah, I think it'll take a lot more work and definitely a lot of reading to pull off. But yeah, I really think it could happen, but also it might not, because I'm really like slow at writing these days. So.
Oh, it's important to take your time.
Yeah,
that's giving yourself the time is also a powerful thing to do, right? But also demand. So I've got one more question. There are so many, this is a good question too. So there are so many cinematic parts of the book, and Devon escaping the closing school gate just in time the Snowball Prom. Have you considered adapting for film or for a TV series?
I mean, the way adaptations work with books is that, I think every author wants their book to be turned into a movie or a TV show, but it has to be optioned by a producer or like a company. So it often has to be bought by them, and you work together on that. I'm not allowed to say much about it, but it has been optioned, but I'm not allowed to talk about anything to do with it. And it might never go anywhere. A lot of books get optioned and never ever come out as a series, or sometimes they do. There's a story of the whole Good Omens show and how that took 40 years or something to happen. So maybe in 2060 you'll see something.
Put that date in your diary. So we can't ask you who's been cast.
No,
because that would be a good game to play. Just who would play those characters. Wonderful. So I have one more question. I'm going to take Chair's privilege, if I may. Your Instagram handle and your Twitter handle is Faridah Loves Tea. This is the wrong weather to ask this question in. But what's your favourite kind of tea?
I love English breakfast. I'm quite basic, but I also love the tea from Dishoom. My friend took me there once, and it kind of ruined English breakfast tea for me, which is a good thing because it's not the real tea, tea was taken. So I think that having the tea at Dishoom, the chai, that's definitely my favorite. But English breakfast is usually my go-to, specifically Yorkshire tea bags is my favorite.
Classic. Can't start a day without a Yorkshire tea. I respect that. Wonderful. So I'm just going to check any last minute questions, and if you members of the audience do feel free, we've still got a little bit of time. But I think what were the big surprises for you, Faridah, in publishing this? Were there things that happened when you sort of submitted the manuscript, or when it actually got published for the first time, that you hadn't expected, that you were really surprised by?
I think I was surprised that I even got published in the first place, because I wrote the story with the intention of publication, but I never really thought that anything would come from it, because it was such a, in my opinion, it was a ballsy story to write. I was like, I'm not really painting white people in a good light, and publishing is very white. So I was like, nothing's gonna happen for this, I think. So I might as well write it and just see what happens. And if nothing comes from it, then I love the story. So I was like, worst case scenario, I wrote something I loved. And so when I got my book deal in 2018 initially, and that was my second year of university. And I was just so shook. I was so happy, but I still kind of didn't feel real. And then I think one of the biggest surprises for me was that people would actually read it and care. I think when you're debuting, you kind of have that weird question in your head that, oh, I think maybe no one will buy this, and you'll kind of get lost, and it will just forever be a book that failed. And then when it took off and I started to get so many DMs, I still get DMs every day from people, and it's just so weird that people are actually reading my story and actually care about these characters and everything. I get fan art, and I get so many lovely messages, and I think that that has been so lovely, but also just so surprising and surreal.
That's a wonderful thing, though, to think about the community that a book like this can build, and that really speaks to the importance of representing characters like these, and and then the way in which that representation kind of I love the idea that there's people making fan art of it, that the representation is producing more representation, is producing more conversation, and again the politics of that I think are really beautiful, and the community that's building is then also a really beautiful thing. And so does that mean then that the internet has been a good space for finding community around the book?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's been so lovely seeing people kind of taking the characters and making them their own. I get people dressing up as the characters for World Book Day, or even just in general, Halloween. There was someone that made a series of short skits about Chiamaka and how elitist she is, and I loved it so much. Or just making their own interpretations. People have done school projects on it. I got tagged in a post of someone that made a school project recently, and they made a game. like an Ace of Spades game board thing, and it was just so cool. So like, it's almost, as you said, it's like representation only gets, you know, breeds more representation, because when you see yourself in a story, you're like, oh, it's possible, and then someone out there then recreates something else from that representation, and you just kind of get more and more. And that's like why it's so important to have books like this in the first place, that spotlight Black characters or Black queer characters.
Absolutely. Again, the politics of that is a really beautiful thing, and the thought of like that there are kids in school doing projects on this is also like an amazing thing. So we've got one last question come in, and that's just, so hi Faridah, congratulations on your amazing book, and this person would like to know, what are your plans for the future? Can you imagine yourself writing in other genres? We've sort of touched on sci-fi and fantasy, but are there other sort of spheres of writing that you'd like to explore?
Yeah, definitely. I really want to write everything. I'm always like obsessed with the idea of just somehow doing everything. Like, I think I'd even write a cookbook if I could, and I don't even know how to cook that well. So I really want to just try and do everything, just so I can tell myself I did it. I'm the type of person that likes to prove things to myself and just try everything out. I definitely want to write like more essay-based stuff sometime, like in the future. Maybe once I've done like a master's or done more reading into some subjects I want to talk about. Yeah, I want to do every single thing in the world and take over.
Brilliant. So I was going to ask you then, like you're happy to swap genres as well, so you write some essays, not just going to stick with novels.
Yeah, I really like love like write something as good as the ones I read. I'm scared like that I'm not going to be good enough. I guess that's another thing to just get over, because you never know.
Yeah,
until
absolutely.
You do it.
And I think that's a powerful sentiment for us to end on, because you never know until you do it, and you did it. So it's awesome. So as I say, sadly we've come to the end of our time together, but thank you so much to Faridah for your generosity in answering those questions and for the thought-provoking discussions that we've had here this evening. It's been a real absolute pleasure to chat with you tonight.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant. So on behalf of the Black History Year Steering Group, I'd also like to thank our audience for being here with us this evening and for giving us some fabulous questions at the end there. And then I'm also going to do a big thank you to Paula and Dominica, who are backstage running the show. So a quick reminder that this event will be up on our blog site, and the link is in the chat, pointing like I know where that is. And then we also want to let you know that we will be kicking off another year of amazing Black History Year events on the 11th of October at 6 p.m. With guest speaker and former NBA basketballer John Amici, who'll be in conversation with the Black History Year team. And you can find out more information via the blog site link in the chat. But once again, a huge thank you to Faridah, and I wish you all an evening filled with ice cubes. I will see you all soon.